don't y'all spoil any of it if I use some of the same material. How many, and most of you have not heard me, so that's good, so I can use some of my old jokes and that sort of thing. How many of you now know that you're going to have questions that you want answered about citizens? Okay, there's a few. Okay, I'll try to leave some time at the end. If not, I'll be happy to wait around. If you saw on your program, the title of my remarks today is Charlie's Frog Boil. I'll get to that in just a minute, tell you a little bit more about that, why I chose that title in just a minute. First, I want to give you just a few little additions to the material that was used in the introduction. Currently, I do also serve as a member of the Florida Hurricane Catastrophe Fund Advisory Council, appointed by the governor. I also serve on the Florida Building Commission, appointed by the governor. And I also do some consulting on the subject of the Florida property insurance market and insurance more broadly. Previously, I was an insurance agent for about 40 years, was president of the First National Insurance Agency in Defuniak Springs. How many of you ever heard of Defuniak Springs? Wow. For those of you who have never heard of it, it's located up in the Panhandle. It's about halfway between Argyle and Mossy Head. I knew that you would appreciate that. About somewhere between Tallahassee and Pensacola along the I-10 corridor. If you're ever up that way and you see that sign, we've only got one exit. We do have about 5 traffic lights in town. So stop by and visit us. We are world renowned. We have the second most perfectly round naturally occurring lake in the world. The first most perfectly round naturally occurring lake in the world is somewhere in Siberia, but we've got the second. We've also got the highest point in Florida. In the north end of our county is the highest point in Florida. Well, I keep forgetting. We have been displaced as the highest point in Florida. There's a location in Marianna, Florida, close to Marianna, Florida, Jackson County, that's now the highest point. Their landfill is in addition to being an insurance agent, I have been around the block a time or two. I've been the president of the Chamber of Commerce, the Walden County Airport Authority, served on the County Commission, served in the Florida House from 2000 to 2008, and I also served on Governor Scott's transition team when he was elected 2009-2010. So I've been to a few county fairs and probably at least 2 goat milkings. Been around the block. I want to ask you this question. I'm going to make an assumption before I share with you some things about Florida's property market. I'm going to assume that you believe capitalism is superior to socialism. Okay. Okay, you're committed to that. I'm going to test your commitment to that principle. But before that, I want to do a side note. How many of you in here are from Orlando? How many from St. Pete? Tampa? Sarasota? So there's a few from Orlando. I'm going to put one of you on the spot. I got to have a volunteer. Who from the Orlando area? Okay, I'll get one of you two. In about 10 days, I'm going to be in the Orlando area, and I'm going to have 10 of my friends with me, and I want to treat them to an elegant evening. I want the finest restaurant in town. Price is not an issue. I want it to be the most, these are special dear friends of mine. And I wanted to find out somebody in Orlando who knew the very best place. I've got a hand over here. Say it again. Did anybody else have?
Christini's.
Christini's. Is it expensive?
They're very expensive. Tuxedo Busboys.
Citrus Club is the private club, but it's actually
Citrus Club. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to pick on somebody. I want this gentleman right here. Since I'm not familiar with Orlando, and I don't know where this place is, I'm not familiar with it. What I would really like to do is to see if I could get you to agree to go with me that night and help entertain my guests and If you don't mind, if you would, pick up the tab. Would you be willing to agree to that?
My wife's been asking me that for years. I won't do it.
Call your brother, he's over there.
You know what?
Yeah, he can afford it.
Honestly, I didn't think this through, and I should not have singled you out. And it doesn't look like you're very embarrassed, but to embarrass you, put you on the spot in front of your friends. You haven't even taken your wife there. I want to make it up to you. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have put you on the spot and singled you out. So I'll tell you what I want to do. I still want to go to that restaurant. But instead of taking 10 of my friends, I tell you what, let's do. Let's take 10 of your friends and I'll pick up the tab. Wow. And your wife can come along. Would you be willing to do that?
Sure. Socialist.
Just for one night.
Let me be very clear about what you just told me. If I understand you correctly, what you just told me is that you would absolutely not consider doing with your money what you would absolutely consider doing with my money.
That's a socialist.
That's true. I've got a point in bringing that up, that little story, and it brings me back to something that I read. And if you've never read after this person, I highly commend that you read his book, Simply the Law. His name was Frederick Bastiat. Got it? He's got it. Everybody ought to get it, and everybody ought to read it. It's not a big book. Some of the language, because of translation, is not the easiest in the world to understand. But I want you to hear this one quote, because it has some application to what I want to talk about Florida property insurance. He said, he was a Frenchman, and he lived from 1801 to 1850. This work was published in a pamphlet version in about 1850. He was a politician, an economist, a philosopher. He said this, and I think it's incredible insight, and it has broad application to the other issues that you deal with. He said this: self-preservation and self-development are common aspirations among all people. And if everyone enjoyed the unrestricted use of his faculties and facilities and the free disposition of the fruits of his labor, social progress would be ceaseless, uninterrupted, and unfailing. Pretty good view of human nature, but that's not the end of his statement. He goes on to say, but there is also another tendency that is common among people. When they can, they wish to live and prosper at the expense of others. This is no rash assertion, nor does it come from a gloomy and uncharitable spirit. The annals of history bear witness to the truth of it. The incessant wars, mass migrations, religious persecution, universal slavery, dishonesty in commerce, and monopolies. This fatal desire has its origin in the very nature of man, in that primitive, universal, and insuppressible instinct that impels him to satisfy his desires with the least possible pain. I think he gave us a very insightful glimpse into the nature of man. When I say the nature of man, that's pretty broad. I'm going to suggest to you that he gave us an insight into our own soul. Because I believe this tendency about which he spoke can only be overcome by a conscious act of our will. When we're tempted to mooch off of others, it takes a conscious act of the will to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And I believe that those wills are formed and informed by some moral code, and in many cases the teachings that were handed down to us by our parents. We have an obligation to overcome that dark side of human nature. Much that happens in the way of legislation, both in the Congress in Tallahassee even county commissions, every area of government, much of what is done there is designed to benefit one group at the expense of another. And it panders to that base human instinct. I'm going to challenge you today to be keenly aware of this principle as you hear politicians talk about what it is they propose to do, because I'm suggesting that in many cases they're proposing solutions that pander to the many at the expense of the fewer or the less informed. Now, Charlie's Frog Boil. What do I mean by that? You've all heard the story about the frog being boiled alive. It's a widespread anecdote that describes a frog slowly being cooked to death, boiled to death. This story is often used as a metaphor for the inability or the unwillingness of people to react to significant change that occurs gradually. This has some application to the subject of Florida property insurance. Some have said that the story is not politically correct, but it can be used. It's fine to use it as long as one points out that it's not literally true. A frog dropped in boiling water is not going to hop out. But you get my point. Charlie's Frog Boil. Why do I suggest Charlie's Frog Boil? Anybody want to guess? Who?
Ethanol, Charlie?
At the risk of, I can't go there. Don't tempt me. I can resist anything but temptation. I've got a story I'll be happy to tell you after this in the hallway about Charlie Chris. When we think about property exposure in Florida, there's a couple of things we need to understand. I believe there's about 3 options. There's others, but this is the 3 main options that we have in funding or paying for the risk of living in paradise. After all, Florida is one of the most dangerous places from the standpoint of natural catastrophe with regard to wind in the world. Not many people realize that Florida represents just a little bit above 50% of the wind risk of the entire nation. We sometimes have heard the call to form a consortium of southern states and pool our risk together, and therefore we can manage it more efficiently. And I like to hear it when people do that. I really hope that we can get that done someday. The problem is when Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina look at it, they say, I don't want no part of Florida's risk. Florida has more coastal exposure as a percentage of their total exposure than any other state in the nation. They don't want to throw in with us. And we have sometimes crafted policy in Florida that's based upon the premise that if we ever get in trouble, we know we've done wrong, but if we get in trouble, the federal government will come in and bail us out. I think the prospects of that are more and more bleak. However, if they did come in and bail Florida out, they bailed out the auto industry, they bailed out banks, if they came in and bailed out Florida, guess what comes with the bailout?
Yeah.
Somebody's strings? I would say chains. They will come in and they will make some changes. There are 3 good ways, or there are 3 primary ways I suggest to finance catastrophic risk in Florida. 2 extremes, and then I'll talk about the middle. One extreme is we can finance it with capital. By that I simply mean that everybody can contribute their share of the risk as best we can estimate it in advance, so that when the storm happens, everybody gets their claims paid. That's the historical traditional model. It has worked for probably 200 years in America, and it's worked much longer than that globally. There is another model that has developed in Florida in recent years, and it's called, what I'll call is the debt model. And that is, we pay for the loss after the fact. Why should we pay in advance? So in the extreme example of a debt model, everybody's homeowner's insurance would be free. Don't worry about it. Politicians love this. I'm going to keep your insurance down. I'm going to give you a break. We're going to, just don't worry about it. After the storm, and they won't tell you this part, after the storm, I'm just going to send you a bill. Now, those are the two extremes, and nobody with a rational mind, a reasonable mind, would suggest that either of those two extremes in today's political environment will work. So what's the third option? It's some combination of the two. So what we have now is a spectrum. We have a spectrum, one extreme, the other extreme, and somewhere in the middle is a combination of capital financing of risk and debt-based financing of risk. I'm going to suggest to you that in January 2007, under the leadership of Charlie Crist, we moved to the extreme wrong direction on that spectrum. We expanded the mission of Citizens, expanded it from being able to assess only other homeowners, other non-citizens homeowners, to all property casualty policy holders in the state of Florida, with the exception of medical malpractice and workers' compensation. So we said we're going to go pick more pockets in order to pay the post-loss assessments than we were. Now that's where Charlie's fraud wall comes in. Because if you turn the heat up quickly, the story goes the fraud will jump out. That is, if we were assessing only other homeowners, non-citizens homeowners, the steam would get turned up faster and they'd jump out and the government would lose this scheme that they've set up. So they said, we're going to expand the assessment base so we get more people, but we turn the steam up far more gradually. That's the essence of House Bill 1A. It was the government expansion of post-loss assessment, a post-loss assessment paradigm in Florida. The truth is that from 1949 until 2012, of the 25 most expensive storms, 11 of them happened since the year 2000. Now we sometimes our fear of this, thank you so much. I have this problem all the time.
That's the frog.
Ribbit.
This does not happen at home because I don't try to speak this forcefully at home. 11 of the 25 storms, largest storms, most damaging storms in history has happened since 2000. We are anesthetized, I can't say that, you know what I mean, to that fact simply because we haven't had a storm make an landfall in Florida since 2006, since 2005 actually. No, I need to correct that. There was a storm, a windstorm, that happened in 2006. Actually 2007. No, it was 2006. 2006, there was a windstorm came through Florida. Created a lot of damage. Anybody remember what that was? It was Hurricane Charlie.
Charlie was in 05.
Charlie was in what? Charlie was when?
05, August 13th, 05.
I'm not talking about that here, Charlie. I'm talking about Charlie Crist. So let's get down. What I'm going to try to do today is just give you some high altitude principles and concepts. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of the amount of each assessment that every agency can levy and all that. What I want to do is try to equip you today with some principles and some concepts so that when you hear the proposals from the respective, I didn't say respectable, the respective candidates, you'll be able to judge for yourself. You don't need me to tell you whether or not one proposal is good or bad. You can judge for yourself if you have the right principles involved. But just briefly, let me talk about the three institutions of quasi-state government that has the potential to reach in your pocket and levy assessments after the loss on you. The first one is Citizens. That's the one that most of us are most familiar with. The background from Citizens was that the Florida Windstorm Underwriting Association was created years ago, back in the 60s, And it was originally intended to provide windstorm insurance in those communities that could not get private market coverage. And it was originally restricted to just barrier island locations. Now I gotta ask, I mean, what business is the state got in providing subsidized insurance for people to live on a barrier island? But we did it because we wanted to develop those islands because they bring in property tax revenues. So governments, local governments, have a perverse incentive to see our coasts and our environmentally sensitive lands built out. There's a perverse incentive that has been at work for years in Florida, which has led us to the place that we're in today. After Hurricane Andrew, we created the Florida Residential Property Casualty Joint Underwriters Association, another government institution that was not going to provide just wind insurance, but was going to provide all of the homeowners type coverages. Those two entities were put together into one in 2003, and we called it Citizens Property Insurance Company because the citizens of Florida are the ones that's going to get the bill. Now, you don't have to be insured by Citizens to get a bill. In fact, every single one of you today who has an automobile insurance policy and a homeowner's insurance policy has an assessment already on it. It's small right now, but it can be very big. I challenge you to go home and look on your auto policy and look down there in the fine print, and there's some assessments on there. That's to pay for the losses that the people in Citizens and the losses of the Hurricane Catastrophe Fund couldn't pay after 2004 and 2005, and you're still paying it because they floated a bond. I just want you to know that. Now, if you like that idea, that's another matter, for another question for another day. But I just want you to be informed that you're not only on the hook right now. In fact, since the 2004-2005 storms, the assessments levied on Floridians from the Citizens and the Florida Hurricane Catastrophe Fund has equaled about $5 billion. So collectively, Floridians have paid about $5 billion since 2004-2005. And up in 2007, the mission of Citizens was restricted to that of availability. That was when someone simply could not get coverage in the marketplace, then Citizens was the insurer of last resort. Under the leadership of Charlie Crist in 2007 and House Bill 1A that I voted against and got summarily dismissed from my position on the Rubio leadership team and the chairman of a council that oversaw 4 committees. There was only 2 that voted no out of 160. I was one of them. They asked me after the fact, they said, "Don't you know something about how to be a team player?" And I said, yeah, I know all about being a team player. My team is 150,000 people in House District 5. The mission changed for Citizens, though. In addition to changing the assessment base, well, actually, that was my point. Not only did we combine everything and make the assessment base larger, but we also did one other fundamental thing about the mission of Citizens. It changed its mission from being that of a market of availability to a market of affordability. Under Governor Crist, he said, "Come on over, let the government take care of you. We will pay, we'll cut the premiums down. I'm going to lower your premiums." I have a question for you. It's a trick question. Be careful how you answer it. There's a clue in the question as to what the correct answer is. So listen carefully. How much do you believe it's going to cost Floridians the next time Florida has a $50 billion storm?
$100 billion.
Most of you are pretty smart. Well, most of you are smart. It's a trick question. How much is it going to cost when we have a $50 billion storm? It's $50 billion. You can take the other position if you want to. My point is this. respectfully, as much respectfully as I can, it don't make a flip what the governor says from the Capitol steps. I'm sorry, but it don't make a twit what the legislature passes in the form of a bill that says that the price of anything is going to be less. After the wind quits blowing and we've had a $50 billion storm, guess what? Somebody is going to pay $50 billion. Now, do you want it to be somebody else, like big bad insurance companies? Or would you prefer for them to pay a little bit and you to pick up the rest? That's the kind of scenario that was foisted upon us in 2007. Without our knowing it, we're happy, we're sitting in the warm bath, and somebody just turned up the notch a little bit. So, Citizens was significantly expanded. It represents a huge assessment liability, what I like to refer to as a hidden hurricane tax. It's been small up till now. It has the potential to be very big. I got to rush on because I'm going to run out. I'm almost out of time. Two other quick things. The Florida Hurricane Catastrophe Fund was also significantly expanded. It's a program by the state that provides reinsurance to insurance companies so that they can charge less rates. The problem is that it was expanded so that it would have had to have paid somewhere in the neighborhood of $28 billion after a major storm, and guess what? You couldn't have borrowed $7 billion at that point in time. It was fictitious, it was a lie, it couldn't be done. Now it's in much better position today. Now it only has a deficit of about $4 billion. It would still not be able to maybe borrow $4 billion in a subsequent season scenario. So we're in a better place there. And then there's another entity called FIGA, the Florida Insurance Guarantee Fund. It also has the ability to assess you. All three of these have the ability to assess you after the fact. The goal, I think, and I'm fixing to close. By the way, y'all know what it means when somebody says in closing. It means absolutely nothing. But I think she's going to hold me to it. The goal, I believe, in Florida should be just a few things here, real quick. Three things. Number one, we should see a private, healthy marketplace. No team of intellectuals, whether it be regulators in Tallahassee or legislators in the Capitol, no team of intellectuals can trump the collective wisdom of 18.5 million people. The people in Florida are smart enough to find the best thing for them in the Florida marketplace. We don't need some intellectuals that congregate in Tallahassee behind closed doors and tell us what's best for us. Secondly, the citizens' policyholder count needs to be lower. Under the leadership of Governor Scott, it has been made lower. A recent criticism issued by former Governor Christ, and I hope to remain former Governor Christ, says that under Governor Scott, rates have gone up. You know what? One of the reasons that the rates went up was some reform that Charlie Crist signed. How hypocritical. But Governor Scott is doing much. There's fixing to be another 400 and something thousand policies taken out of Citizens and put back in the private marketplace, reducing your hurricane tax assessment liability. And a final note. If you were the CEO of an insurance company that only wrote auto insurance, like a Geico or a Progressive, how would you feel if you had to assess your policyholders over something that they had nothing to do with? It drives competition out of the state. We need to change the paradigm. I hope I've given you just some concepts and principles with which you can judge for yourself the merit of the insurance proposals that you'll hear. And just remember, in life, you have choices, then decisions, and then consequences. You can hide from reality, but you cannot hide from the consequences of hiding from reality. Thank you very much for your.